Today I'm speaking with Dr. Jessica Higgins. Dr. Higgins, and I refer to her as Jessica during the show, but Dr. Higgins is a powerhouse of amazing information. And we really focused the majority of our episode today talking about emotional attunement. And so, for those of you who may not have a psychology background, you don't need one because emotional attunement is basically the ability to turn towards another person and connect with them on an emotional level. And we talk about all of the different facets that go into that, such as how to really listen to understand, how to make asks and requests of your spouse or of other people in your lives based on what you're actually feeling and not just the complaint that you're feeling in the moment, but identifying what is the deeper need underneath that's probably what should be communicated instead. We talk about this and so much more in today's episode. Let's dive in. Jessica, I'm so excited for you to be here with me today and for us to talk about this topic of working through criticism and how to better communicate. Thanks for joining me on the show.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
How did you get involved in the line of work that you do? I know you have 2 degrees in psychology. You've been doing coaching. You've been working with clients for over 20 years. What led you to want to be in this helper space of working with relationships?
Well, psychology in general, I think I've always had an inclination towards being interested in people, why they do what they do, and having a great degree of empathy and understanding, just even as a little one. I think my mother helped support that. And then more specifically, as it relates to relationship, I had my own journey with difficulty and having a hard time resolving that and really confronted, because at the time that occurred, I had a master's in psychology, I had an undergrad in psychology, and grew up in a pretty progressive family where I had been learning I statements and how to acknowledge, a lot of the emotional intelligence, even though I don't think we use that word, and still felt ill-equipped. And so it prompted me to do a deeper dive in my own understanding and the relationship principles. And when I started to study and recognized, oh, wow, there's so much here that the average person, granted, this was early 2000s. So I think our collective culture has changed quite a bit with a lot of the information that's available through articles and podcasts like this, and that help people have exposure. But at that time, it felt very much as if unless someone self-studies or has incredible modeling in their family of origin, that people, myself included, felt pretty surprised by the terrain of long lasting intimacy and what might get activated. And what I mean by that is I had placed a little bit more emphasis on finding the person that I felt very connected to, and we had similar values. And so at that time, that relationship did not last, but it did set me up. And I've been with my husband for almost 18 years and we practice all the principles. But at that time, we felt that we were the one. And so we felt like we had all the makeup of a lasting relationship. And then we had our conflict, which is, as you and I both know, there's a second stage of intimacy in the developing, and that is the power struggle and recognizing our differences and how we negotiate conflict. And just again, felt very stunned by the difficulty and the conflict that emerged. And so all that to say, that relationship ended. I went to a PhD program, and then I sought out to really study this in my PhD and my research. And then it has prompted my work with people and just recognizing that when people have this, I mean, I'm sure you came across the statistic. I forgot, you may even know who it's credited to. But when I had my private practice in Boulder, Colorado, at that time, couples were still coming in as their last ditch effort. I think that's changed a lot. A lot of people are being a little bit more proactive. And it was analogous to breaking your arm and then going to the medical doctor 7 years later saying, can you help me fix my arm? Right. Yes. And we would have been able to be so much more of help had you come in sooner. So again, I do think this is changing, but that's long-winded way to answer your question that this has just been a personal, professional. It's been a real desire to serve and really help people. I do believe relationship, when it's healthy and secure, it ripples out and affects all areas of our life and our functioning in healthy ways. So I do think that it's a really important venture.
I would agree with that. I believe maybe one of the citations you're thinking about is that couples on average typically wait an average of 6 years after marriage problems begin
Yes.
before they begin to go and seek therapy for it. And I think that that is from Gottman, although I'm not
I
a
was thinking,
hundred.
that's what I was going to say, but I wasn't
Okay, well, if
sure.
both of us think that, surely it's right. We're both
Yeah.
on the same wavelength, right?
Yeah.
Yes. So, what was your topic? What was your dissertation topic for your PhD program?
So it was a meta-analysis, and for people
Hmm.
that don't know what that is, it's looking at other studies and looking at the themes across many studies so that there's a distilled insight or findings that come from multiple studies. And I was
Hmm.
looking at the idea of conscious relationships. So people who really try to implement a lot of awareness, a lot of personal growth, and are practicing principles to grow their relationship.
Hmm.
And yeah, so it was, I think at that time, really helpful in many regards. And a lot of my committee members, or at least two, were very much like, you need to turn this into a book. And I didn't, but I still might, because it continues to bear out in what I find.
Yeah.
Although, I did cite and reference the attachment research and the
Uh-huh.
work of Susan Johnson and her colleagues in the
Hmm.
emotionally focused therapy. And I will say, even though that was part of my research, in practice, I feel like fundamentally, if that's not addressed, I think it's a little bit of a trying to address symptoms without really addressing some of the
The core
core.
issues.
Yeah. So that's
Mm.
definitely been through experience, recognizing that really is important to bring light to and help couples really orient around. Because if we're not addressing those deeper layers, all the communication practices are really helpful, but if we're not accessing those underlying layers, then that's where it can just continue to perpetuate.
Yeah. So for our listeners who may be thinking, okay, I've heard the word attachment before, but what is she talking about when she says that that's a core issue in a relationship? Or what's EFT? Who is Sue Johnson? Explain a little bit deeper those two areas of the emotionally focused therapy and attachment and why you think those are fundamental to the marriage relationship.
Yeah. So Bowlby is the one that's really credited for the original research of attachment. And I'll try to just distill it into very simple terms. When we are young in our environment growing up, our caregivers, most likely our parents, are responding to us even as an infant. And we learn very quickly what to expect and how to negotiate and how to play into those relational dynamics. And over
Mm-hmm.
time, this repetition of being in an environment, we develop a system basically of how our body feels, what we expect into like what our thinking is, what our emotion is. And ideally, this is where we could probably break this down into two big buckets, which is secure or insecure. And I like to say tendencies for research purposes. Researchers really like to categorize in really gross ways, meaning just big buckets to be able to identify and make sense of. But I think in the lived experience, it's more likely on a spectrum. So we have certain
Mm-hmm.
tendencies.
Yeah.
And I will say something else about if we didn't have a secure attachment young in our young life, we still as adults can earn secure attachment through secure functioning and having a trusting, reliable relationship that continues
Mm-hmm.
to feel secure and that we can depend on, that then we start to change our attachment system. So in a nutshell, attachment is basically our relational template. It's our framework for how to negotiate relating to others. And a lot of this operates unconsciously, and it's installed just based on lived experience and repetition that
Mm-hmm.
we knew a certain thing. And thus that's how we got through and negotiated those dynamics. And so we
Mm-hmm.
continue to perpetuate them. And so there's the secure, then there's the insecure, and that can be broken down to different subcategories. But the insecure, typically the largest is the more anxious, which is maybe having inconsistent or intermittent caregiving. So it wasn't predictable. The child wasn't quite sure when they were going to be responded to. And so there's this hypervigilance, there's this checking, there's this fear of abandonment or uncertainty that can propel someone into, again, this over managing or seeking outwardly to get that reassurance, which makes sense if we look at their environment. And then the other large type is more of avoidant, and there's other subtypes too, but these are the two prominent. And the avoidant tends to feel like, based on their environment and their experiences, that I can't trust others to respond to me in a safe way. Thus, I rely on myself. That's the better move. And I turn inward and soothe that way. I don't look to others to soothe. And so this is my best reliable source of regulating. And thus, I don't tend to turn towards others. I tend to turn away and seek grounding, seek that sense of comfort and reassurance through self. And so in adulthood, these patterns play out again unconsciously, that then can create a lot of disconnect, and the cycle is really problematic. And I can talk a lot more about that, but that's what I'm referring to. And so Susan Johnson and her colleagues did primary research and peer-reviewed articles, and they developed through all their watching tape that it's a therapeutic approach to helping couples work and address and focus on the emotion and these attachment longings and needs and fears, because most of the time, again, they're operating underneath. We're not always conscious of them. And so therapeutically, if the therapist can help guide and facilitate that couple's process so that becomes more visible, then the focus can get on what's most alive in these motivations that are fueling. I'm sure you've heard, and many people are like, we're fighting about the dishes, and it's not about the dishes, or we're fighting about the trash or the children, or whatever it is. And underneath it likely is like, I'm afraid you don't care, or I'm afraid you're not with me, or that I'm not good enough, or those type of things. And those are more attachment, fears, and longings.
Yeah. So could a person work toward, if they're in an insecure attachment phase or cycle, can they work towards being secure alone, or do they have to work towards security with their spouse or someone else?
Okay, so I can't reference research around this, but my sense of what I understand is, and my experience is, that yes, one can practice secure functioning. And so these are the ways of relating and the functioning, the moves and the things that one does that are known to be secure functioning actions and tendencies. And that is going to help facilitate. Now, I think actually for the attachment system to change, I do believe, and what I understand about the research is that we do need a person that we're bonded with, that we can have some trust and some longevity with. So some certain amount of time to build that trust, that our being gets to start to have a new experience and the old gets to atrophy. It's not like it completely ever goes away, but
Sure.
the more dominant, like, oh, I can trust, I can turn towards this person. They are going to respond to me. And I can trust that this person is going to be there. And
Yeah.
so we then start to, on a nervous system level, start to adapt to that way of functioning, and that it's more healthy, more healing, and tends to be more optimal, and affects many areas of our life when we can be in a more secure, healthy, functioning relationship.
So if you can get to feeling secure in just one relationship in life, the theory or the hypothesis is that that will translate into other relationships.
Yeah, because what happens is, if our nervous system is more relaxed, it's going to affect all of our hormones, our neurochemicals. It's usually when we feel a level of peace and regulation. Like, there's a lot of research around just even the experience of pain. The fMRI studies that if we're holding the hand of one that we love and we feel close to, and they do these shocks in the brain and like can assess like how the brain is firing, and it's not shock in the brain, it's shock on the body, that secure relationship, those people will feel and experience less pain than those that don't have that bond. Or similarly, if I don't know how they equated this or found this, but if a couple who has secure functioning is looking at a mountain that they're asked to climb, if they're in a secure functioning relationship, they're going to assess that mountain as not as difficult and that they have more resource to
Interesting.
hike that mountain
Yeah.
versus the one that goes it alone. That mountain's
Mm,
going to look a lot more daunting and they're going to maybe question their ability or not feel as confident. And this is,
mm,
if we look at life in general, it translates to any difficulty in life. Like we're stronger
yeah.
together when we can
Right.
face the challenges and feel the
For
resource, the
sure.
safe haven, the refuge. And the research is also cradle to grave. We need this. Like this is part of our human need to feel soothed and have a place to go for comfort.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And it makes so much sense, right? But having that visual in your head of when if you're looking at a mountain and you're alone, then yeah, there's what's going to happen to me? I could get hurt. What if I get sick? What if I fall? There's no one there to pick me up.
Totally.
Whereas if you're doing it with someone that you trust and you're in that secure attachment together, then yeah, like okay, we can handle it if we do it together. I think that's a great visualization. So, can we flesh out a little bit more if kind of the way I heard you say this is a gross oversimplification, but you said a person can begin to do the things that would be secure functioning type behaviors, even if they're not in the area of secure attachment yet. So to me, it sounded a little bit like smile, like fake it till you make it. So
Mm.
smile even if you're not happy, and like it'll at least help you do, get a little bit happier. So is it kind of like that? And if so, what are those things
Mm.
that a person in secure functioning would do that perhaps someone's not doing if they're in insecure or avoidant or anxious or any of those other subtypes of it?
Okay, so first of all, I want to say I wouldn't recommend anybody to just throw spaghetti on the wall here, right? That
Mhm.
there's a dynamic at play. So if there's an understanding, which I'll explain a little bit if you're interested, but I would recommend someone getting books by Susan Johnson, Hold Me Tight, Love Sense. Stan
Mhm.
Tacton does a really good job of, he has different language, but he's written a lot of books. I think his latest book is In Each Other's Care. And he's talking about actually how to workshop, where his other books do break down some of the principles and some of the secure functioning.
Mm.
So to answer your question, I do want to give a little framework, if I may, that might
Please.
help. Okay,
Yeah.
so let's just use your classic two insecure types. So you have
Mhm.
one that's a little bit more anxious, and then you have one that's a little bit more avoidant in their tendencies. So the anxious one has a tendency which relates to the criticism and the complaint. It's
Mm.
the one that's typically directing the attention to the partner in a way of protest, right? And we'll ask questions, we'll give criticism, we'll give complaint, and we'll maybe even sometimes attacks when it gets escalated.
Mm.
They're the ones that tend to raise their voice or throw up their arms about it, basically.
Mm.
So that is in an attempt to get some attention. This isn't, something's happening and it's not going well, it's not working, and I want your help. But that's not actually the clear signal of that is not given. It's more of, why didn't you take out the trash? Why didn't you clean the dishes? Or you forgot again, or whatever it is. So when I want to talk about the underneath part, so there's what's visible on the outside, what the behavior of the person is doing. So the avoidant is typically, again, going to get quiet. This is where, again, with the Gottman's research around perhaps even stonewalling or just turning away, not turning towards. And again, the attempt is not to be rejecting, it's attempt to calibrate, it's attempt to get that inner soothing, because there is a threat on their end as well. So the cycle and how people behave is creating pain for both. However, they're speaking very different languages.
Yeah.
So the underneath part of the anxious one is typically, where are you? Do you still care? Are you
Mhm.
with me? Are you leaving? I'm I'm afraid or something like that, feel insecure. And then the avoidant one is, this isn't across the board, but I'm just giving examples. The avoidant one might say, oh, I'm failing you. I am afraid I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy, or you don't like me, or those type of things. So while this is happening on the inside, neither partner is actually making that visible.
Yeah.
So they're speaking in a way that is landing with the other that's causing pain, and they keep their attempts. And these attempts, if we look at, again, their childhood and their relationship template,
Mm-hmm.
was the best move to cope in that environment. However, in the adult romantic relationship, it creates that pain, and thus they're really feeling at a loss, and like a tremendous amount. Sometimes couples will get into fighting and protest, or sometimes they'll just be not talking. And so this can lead to a lot of upset. So to answer your question about secure functioning, if the one that tends to be a little bit more seeking, it really, in a nutshell, comes back to, how do I make those inside parts a little bit more visible? And that's extremely vulnerable. And I think there's many ways to do that by taking that risk. Some,
Mm.
we show up for ourselves. So for me, when I started doing this work, I did have more of the anxious tendencies. And when I started dating my now husband, he was a little more contained, not as expressive, difficult to read. And I could feel how much I liked him and I was into him. And I was like, I don't know if he likes me back. And I had to really acknowledge and be with my own fear. And
Mm.
I was able to hold and give some comfort to myself of like, I'm really into this guy. I don't know if he's into me as much. And even some grief around, he might not be the person I'm with, and how to show up for that. And so instead of trying to seek reassurance from him, because I wasn't asking for reassurance, I was asking questions that were trying to give me information that might reassure me. But
Mm.
again, this is often happening beneath the field of awareness. Like, it's often unconscious.
Yeah.
But if I was seeking reassurance and not asking him for reassurance, and it's disguised by some criticism or question or complaint,
Mm.
he's not
Yeah.
even knowing that I'm seeking reassurance. He's just thinking I have issue with him. And so then his defensiveness is up. And then he's trying to manage what feels like an attack. And then we're off track. I'm not even raising my hand like, I'm insecure. I'm not sure if you like me as much as I like you. Thus, like, this is vulnerable, right?
Right.
So the more that we can make that visible, whether or not we do that internally and just hold it for ourselves and recognize, okay, what's really here on the inside part? What's my fear? What's my longing? What's my insecurity? Then we're in a much better position to then do the secure functioning, whether or not it's the smile, or whether or not it's, I really want to, I really want to call out that thing, but I recognize that's my impulse. That's my tendency. How can I just slow down, and how can I look at what's really happening for me so that I can set this up for success, and vice versa for the one that turns away? Like, how can I just hold for a minute and just, can I feel what's happening?
Mm.
And can I maybe try a different move, but in service? I don't want to invite anybody to abandon the deeper need, because it's not going to work, right?
Yeah.
Our nervous system is going to win, period. We're designed to protect ourselves and survive. Like, there's just too much that's working in service of that we're not going to have the willpower to just override that. We need to show up for those parts. And like I said, this is inner workings of being in connection. And so we can't just bypass that.
Right. So, in getting into the topic we said we were going to talk about today,
Yeah.
but I want to bridge with something you just said. So, in thinking about how it's so important in a relationship to be able to turn towards, to attune, to be vulnerable,
Yeah.
right? And that being what allows secure attachment to form and to stay formed in the relationship. What about when people set boundaries? Or let me ask it this way. Do you think people sometimes set boundaries in such a way that it actually hurts the security of the attachment in the relationship?
Absolutely.
Oh, let's talk about that. What do you think that would look like?
Like a version of that?
Sure, yeah. Like what and so one of the reasons I'm asking this is because boundaries is such a hot topic for the past couple of years, right? So everyone
Mm.
is like, you got to set a boundary, you got to have boundaries. And I'm not against that. But
Mm.
I think that if it's not done well or thoughtful, we can say things are boundaries when maybe it's more of a punishment of the other person, or
Mm.
like we call things boundaries that aren't actually boundaries, and we think that we're helping or protecting ourselves, but maybe we're doing it in such a way, kind of like what you were talking about with the avoidant person. Like, well, my boundary is this, but it's actually just my way to keep you out,
Hmm.
right?
Yes.
So, what are some ways that boundaries go askew and actually can hurt the security of attachment in a relationship?
Yes, I would love to workshop this. Do you
Yeah.
have an example that might help that I
Oh
can
gosh.
help like give some specificity here? Because I'll just, while you're thinking of that, I can just say
Yeah.
I agree that our tone, the microfacial expressions, the quality of the nonverbals and how we're delivering something are sending way more cues. We've heard this, right? 80+% of our communication is nonverbal. And
Mhm.
our, what we call, and I think the neuroscience is the, forgetting, I know there's co-regulation, the neuroception, so that we're with the people around us, we're resonating and we're attuning to the people's nervous
Mhm.
system. So most specifically, as we're talking about relationship, we're picking up on cues without even us knowing it about their nervous system. So
Mm.
if one is upset, like that's going to be known regardless of what words are being spoken. And when we talk about setting limits and setting boundaries, I would highly recommend doing it in a calmer way, not in the heat of the moment, because that's going to, again, the nonverbals are going to convey some type of punishment or some type of rejection or some type of distancing because of the
Mm.
escalated moment. I don't think
Mm.
that that's going to bring a sense of collaboration and inviting the partner to respond. Like I like boundaries
Yeah.
that can be set where one can uphold them. It's not about, I need you to do X, Y, and Z. It's like, this is the thing that I'm going to now practice. I realize my old way of relating is causing some difficulty. And here's something I'm going to be moving towards. And here's how
Mm.
I might show up differently. So I'm almost changing the rules or the game a bit. And I want to give you a heads up because I'm not
Yeah.
trying to blindside you.
Yeah.
And I can, there can be, when we look at being in service of the collaborative, co-creating relationship, there are two people, if we're talking about a monogamous relationship, that there's a consideration for the other. There's a real care and a regard. It's not as though, again, that punishment, it's like, here's where I'm at and I want to work with you. And so
Yeah.
when we can have that consideration,
Mm.
sometimes new ideas, new possibilities, things can emerge when we can have that empathy and understanding. But I will say, for one that typically has a hard time setting boundaries, they're likely the ones that have been the giver in the relationship. So they're likely already very empathetic and maybe have lost themselves. So I don't know that that's as important, but I do think in the relating to not lose sight of that, one can do the pendulum shift, right? Of like, the resentment and like get a little firm about it, which
Yeah.
I appreciate is sometimes part of the practice. And to your point,
Sure.
it can be a push away.
Yeah. So I have one example and then I have two other thoughts. So I have two others after I would do this one example, two others of things I've started to see a lot on social media
Ah,
that I see and I think, I don't know that that's actually healthy, but we'll get to those next.
hmm.
Okay. So the first one is an example of, let's say, I'm trying, I'll use the woman as the example for this. So this is a common one though that I hear with business owners, CEOs. It could be a common one though with like a single mom, and or not just single mom, a like a caregiving, the home mom, a stay-at-home mom. So, and it's this idea of I need to have time for myself
Hmm.
in order for me to be able to have a good day, for me to be productive through my day. So Where I see this happen a lot, and it's happened in my own relationship, I see it with other people though, is either it's a stay-at-home mom who says like, this is what I need, and so this is what I'm going to do. And it can feel very rigid.
Hmm.
But for her, the processing is like, I don't have help during the day because you might be gone. And so I'm unwilling to budge on the fact that this has to happen. Like either when you come home, I'm going to leave or whatever it is. And
Hmm.
it's not necessarily talked about, but it may be a boundary that she set as a form of self-care,
Hmm.
but maybe it hasn't come across the right way. The other side of that may be a man who is the like a high performer at work, and
Hmm.
so for him he's like, I have to have the morning, so I'm not going to be here to help with the kids, but it's my boundary and my form of self-care. So kind of, I guess the underlying of both of those is I need time for self-care. It's time just for me, and this is something I'm going to do even to the detriment of how it might affect you, but you're going to have to deal with it.
Yeah, it's almost
So
like good
that's,
luck with that.
yeah, like good luck with that, figure it out.
Yeah.
But I need this and it's my boundary. And so then when someone says it's my boundary, it feels like something you can't cross
Hmm.
because they've set it as a boundary. So discuss. How would you handle that situation?
Well, first of all, and just a kind of validating the larger scope of this, that to come into the recognition of self-care and the necessity to function more optimally and to devote that attention, right, to prioritize that. Like that's a great thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that likely there's a progression that got that person there.
Yeah.
And perhaps they've given too much, as I just said, or perhaps there's resentment. And so I want to acknowledge that we're not talking about this in a vacuum.
Right.
Okay. So turning towards the actual delivery, when there is the recognition, okay, this isn't working. I'm not okay. I
Mm-hmm.
need some self-care time. The way in which the thing that really stands out in your example is this unilateral decision. This is happening.
Mm-hmm.
You figure out how to adapt or pivot.
Yeah.
And it's perhaps not giving space to allow your partner to show up for you, to allow new solutions to emerge. Because likely one human brain is going to think of, this is how I can get my self-care. I'm going to go to yoga in the morning, and that's the only way that I'm going to be able to get it. Right. But if we look at,
Right.
okay, what does yoga allow you to do? It allows me to breathe. I'm sweating. I'm feeling like I'm able to just focus on my inner world and like all the things. There might be many things that could provide that same experience.
Mm.
So I think it could be if someone can recognize the need for this self-care a little before the threshold, then there's a little more
Yeah.
capacity to have this conversation and allow your partner to hear and really show up. And then there
Mm.
could be other solutions that could be generated. It might be the thing that the person wants, to go to yoga in the morning, or it could be, let's look at how we can create this. And maybe there's a progression of like, okay, for 2 weeks, would you be willing to do this time slot? Because this would allow, there's some negotiating. But I think oftentimes people fear that because they don't want to rock the boat. They're afraid of the conflict. They're afraid of not being heard. So they don't even
Mm.
let their partner see how important that is. So if
Mm-hmm.
we can deliver it in a soft way. So one example of that would be, okay, so we've been doing this arrangement for however long. I recognize when I don't have the time in the morning, I end up just going and going and going. And you might even be able to see this at night. I'm exhausted, I'm cranky, I'm irritable, and I just have nothing left. I'm running on fumes, and maybe I have a health thing that I'm negotiating, or maybe I just don't
Mm.
have friends and I'm not very happy, or I feel depressed, or whatever the side effects are, like making that just a little bit more clear and front loading that. And I'm really recognizing one thing that would really help would be to have this self-care. And here's one idea of how I could get that need met. And I
Yeah.
want to come to you around, this feels, in order for, the even classic analogy of like being on a plane, putting your oxygen mask on first before someone else's, like this is similarly, like this is, I'm not okay. And this is what I
Mm-hmm.
really need to prioritize and implement. And so it's almost as if like, I need this. This is something that I really need for my well-being. And I want to work with you in a way that would feel good to you, could be a win for you as well. But this is something I'm going to be investing in and putting attention towards, and I want to work with you. Now, if the person's like, I don't want to work with you, then we might get into a little bit more territory of, okay, like here's what I'm going to contribute. I mean, that I wouldn't recommend people going down this road, but one might need to be a little bit more boundaried because the other person, the dynamics don't allow for real negotiating.
Yeah. Yeah. I really like that. Again, it goes back to the underlying principle being, how can we communicate with each other in a vulnerable way so that we are sharing what our needs are, what our feelings are, what our underlying core issues are, but not in a way that pushes the other person away, but invites them to help be a part of the solution. And I think that part is key. And it's something that is missed a lot in some of the things that we can hear on social media or, whatever, of how can we invite our spouse to come in and be a part of the solution with us as we are sharing with what our needs are, which probably helps with attachment as well, right? Because when we believe that they care about us and they're helping us get those needs, it just builds the security.
And they show up for us, right? It is scary. I don't want to take away from it's vulnerable to put a risk or put a need out there that's vulnerable. It's an emotional risk. And if we don't allow our partner to see, then they don't really have as much chance to show up.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And then we might get angry that they never show up, but we've never asked them to help or to be a part of it. They might not know how to show up, right? Oh, yeah.
Or we lead with criticism, right? We haven't ever really been super raw about it and show as like our underbelly, if you will. And thus the person doesn't even really know the ask, right? We think we're asking, but we're more criticizing.
Yes.
And so the person's like defending against the characterization or the description.
Right.
And then it's off track. We're talking about what you do or don't. We're trying to recreate reality of like how much you've taken out the trash or when, that type of thing.
Yeah.
And we've lost. The thing is like, I need some help here, or I really want to feel more healthy and available, and that requires some self-care.
What are your top 2 to 3 tips of how to help people identify criticism and turn it into something more constructive and helpful?
Yeah. Well, just to preface that, I will say most people, even in an intimate relationship, don't respond well to unsolicited corrective feedback. Like it's just a surprise. Like we have a front row seat to our partner and we're seeing so many things, and aren't they interested in our insight and our assessment?
Actually, we're the experts on them.
Yes, exactly. And we might see things. And look, we can solicit, hey, I have some thoughts. Are you open to any feedback? Or I've had some wonderings. Like we can solicit, but the unsolicited corrective feedback, most people are not responding to that. And as we just said, when we lead with that, we're misdirecting. We're not sending a clear cue. We're talking about whatever the issue is and how they're showing up. They're going to respond to that when really the inside part is, hey, I need some self-care, right? So top tips, I would turn a complaint, and I have to do this myself too, because again, we're wired up to protect ourselves. When there's any type of issue, thing that we don't like or hurt or feel threatened around, we're going to want to protest. And if we grew up in a family that's high functioning, maybe even type A, or responded more to performance or the intellect, right? We're likely going to resource that, which is being more intellectual and assessing. And maybe even we in our careers, we're attorneys or assessors, or, some use the intellect. And so that critique we heavily lean on because it's reinforced in so many arenas. And yet emotionally, as we've talked about with secure attachment, it's the emotional responsiveness that's the juice. That's the core. That's the glue. So if we're leading with the intellect, again, our partner has no idea what really matters in the heart and how we show up for each other. So if we lead with something, it's like a smoke signal. It's like we're sending something that isn't the thing. And so to turn a complaint into a request or to turn it into a reveal, that could be a good, okay, so what is this about me? can I just, before I impulsively go to like, I mean, I feel it too when my husband does something, I'm easily want to call it out. And if I have emotion about it that seems a little larger than what the situation warrants, it's a pretty good indicator to me that I have some feelings around this.
Mm-hmm.
So can I pause? Can I slow down? I think that would be another really key thing, is just to give some inquiry. We're moving so fast in modern living that often we're not even touching in on what the reflection, the self-awareness. So the slowing down and asking some questions that could get at, what am I feeling here? What is it? And another way to get at this would be, if they did the thing I was asking or complaining about, what would that allow me to feel? It's almost like an ability to reverse engineer. Oh, I'd feel like he's thinking about me, or I'd feel cared about, or I'd feel more relaxed, or, so that can give some clues as to what matters on a deeper level. So ultimately, when we can reveal what we're really feeling, that increases the likelihood that they're going to respond to us exponentially, because we're showing them really directly and really clearly. Now, there are blocks that get in the way of that, especially when there's long-standing difficult patterns. But more often than not, when we can send that clear, vulnerable cue, our partner is going to feel it and they're going to soften. And then if we can make a real clear request, right, that's also really clear. And when we can say why it matters, that's even more helpful, because again, it's not so much that our partner is as interested in our directives, but they want to show up for us. It's the emotional glue that why we care for one another and want to have each other's back.
That's
Does
great.
that help?
Oh, yeah. I love that. So the notes I wrote were to turn a complaint into a request or a reveal. And some of the ways to help do that is, what is this about? Okay, the second thing I wrote is, if they did the thing I'm complaining about, how would I feel? And the first thing was, what is this about me? So the thought behind that was, what is it that I'm actually needing? And a way to
Yes.
help get that is, how would I feel if they actually changed the thing I'm complaining about? I think that's super helpful. So one of the two things I was going to mention, you did hit on a little bit. So the two things that I've been seeing on social media that I look at and I think, I don't know how I feel about those. So one of them is this response to people of, I'm not asking for your feedback. So I'm going to do this thing and I'm not asking for your feedback. And I can understand saying that for sure, because there's definitely been times, even this past week, I was having a conversation with someone. It wasn't my husband, but I was having a conversation with someone and they just started giving me, and it wasn't like they weren't being critical or anything, but they did start giving their opinion about something. And
Yeah.
I was like, I'm not really asking for your feedback or for your opinion.
Yeah.
But I also didn't, because of the relationship, it didn't feel like it would have been appropriate to say, I'm not asking for your feedback, because that would feel like a shutdown to them. When I do care about them and about their thoughts and about things like that, even if I don't necessarily want to hear all of it, or at least take it all like I need to act on what they're saying, right? So that's one. And then the second one that I've been seeing is this, you shouldn't say you're sorry for things you didn't do, which in premise I agree with. But I I've always, like, I feel completely fine with saying to someone, and you might have a completely different view on this, I'm sorry you feel that way. Even if I didn't do the thing that led them to feel that way, or if I didn't intentionally do the thing that felt that way, because to me, it feels like a way of turning towards. Like, I understand that something has hurt you and I hate that for you, right? And I am sorry for that. So, and I think kind of the premise of what I've seen some of the people who post about it say, like, you shouldn't say you're sorry, and they have reasons. And part of it's like, you don't, honestly, I don't know, because I read the reasons and I still think, I'm still going to say to people, I'm sorry that you feel
Yeah.
that way.
Yeah.
But would love to hear your thoughts on those two things.
Yeah. So the first one thought that I'm having as you're describing this is, oftentimes people really want to help and they don't always know how. And so it can be this thing to like relate to what you're saying and chime in or put it in their thoughts.
Sure. Yeah.
And so one thing that could be a little bit for the people that maybe one doesn't care to invest a tremendous amount a dialogue into, they could just say, well, I'm really looking to just feel heard right now, or, I really appreciate your
Yeah.
input. And I think, there could be a way to direct it in a way of like, I'm still thinking about this. And, I think there's a part of me that just wants to really acknowledge, there could be a way to
Yeah.
just say, here's what I'm looking for right now. Or,
That's right.
this is
That's awesome.
difficult. And
Yeah.
I think there's a part of me that just like enjoys our friendship. And I just want to have fun. Or,
Mm.
there's a lot that I'm sifting through, and it just feels really meaningful to hear you just be with me and just listen like that. That
Yeah.
is super helpful. And I appreciate your thoughts. And, there could be a way to just weave that in that gives a little cue, right? Without this long drawn out thing, where someone that maybe you do want to invest in, I think there's a time and place to say, I'm feeling sensitive right now, or there's a lot that I am shaky about and don't feel quite clear on. And I know that your input means a lot to me and your thoughts mean a lot to me. And I don't know that I'm ready. Can we revisit this? Can we come back in like a
I like
day,
that.
or, a certain amount of time that allows me
Yes.
to get some stability with where I'm at, or I just feel responsive or available or have the capacity. Like maybe I'm tired and I'm hungry and I can't really receive what you're wanting to share with me. And it is important. So I think conveying that it's important, but then also giving some, again, visibility to, I'm not in a position, I'm not in the best space right now.
I like that.
Or the rebuttal would be like, well, what if I just don't want to hear it at all? Right? That's a little more difficult. And there could be some reasons, right? That could be a good indicator that like, oh, when I talk about my work and you chime in, I don't always feel like you're hearing what I'm really wanting to achieve or my value. I feel like you're kind of taking over, right? And so then that's a different conversation around how we relate and how we share space around a topic that's kind of my arena, right? It's kind of my thing. So that's not as much as like, I just don't want feedback. That's how we talk and how I receive, how you share. And that could be a little bit. And again, a good coach or therapist could really support and help with this. Should I move on to the second?
Yeah. Love
Okay.
it.
So the second, I already forgot. Give me one
I'm
second.
sorry. You
Okay.
feel it.
Yeah. So oftentimes, especially as we described in this emotional glue way, even if we had no intention, let's say I'm the one that was the offense, I did something offensive and that I could apologize, but I'm like, I didn't intend to be, or it wasn't offensive to me, but I'm listening to you and I get that. When we can actually have these deeper conversations and I see the person that I care and love about, and I actually understand their challenge and I feel their pain, my heart goes out to them and I feel bad that they're hurting. This is the empathy around, I'm hurting with you. Like I love you and I hurt that you hurt. And so I feel badly. And so this is where I'm sorry could be appropriate, but I don't even think it's necessary to say I'm sorry. Just that empathy around like, I feel bad that you're feeling bad, or I feel bad. And I wouldn't just say this without emotion. It's the emotion that's the glue. Right. So I wouldn't just like, it's not just about the words, but if I can really convey this sense of like, like I get the impact and I feel you and it matters to me. This is, in every other arena, I could continue to do what I do and it's not an issue, but I want to show up for you. So I'm going to want to help. Yeah. And so I'm going to consider this. I didn't understand how it landed with you. I didn't understand the impact and thus had no intention. And again, I still feel like if I didn't know how you were feeling, I probably would do it again, right? I'm not sorry that I made that choice necessarily at the time, right? If we go back in time. However, with this new information, my care for you, my wanting to help and show up for you, I will consider that. So that's a twist on the I'm sorry to more of the intimate, close one. And then for people in life, right? It's, people, I'm sorry, but I'm not sorry, right? I'm sorry, but I'm not sorry. So I actually tend to say sorry and I try to implement like, thank you for your patience or weave in different things because I do think there's some value in language and what we're
Mm-hmm.
perpetuating. And then similarly with people that we maybe don't care about, I think there can be a way to acknowledge the impact. And, if I knew, like, I think there can be a way to apologize in a way that's giving acknowledgement to the other person in their experience. Like, that was not my intention. I didn't want to hurt you. I do want to show up and I do want to help. Like when we talk about issues of like racism or, these things that maybe we're not conscious of that we perpetuate, like, I am sorry that I hurt you. Right. That's a thing to apologize for. So let me take that back. Cause I'm like, you're giving me an example of what I might do that I'm not sorry for. Like, is that right? That I'm not sorry for it, but I want to acknowledge someone else's experience, or am I getting this here?
Yeah, like, and it may not even have been something that someone did. So an example that I'm thinking of is if my son comes home from school and he, someone said something mean to him or something happened on the playground. And yeah, there's probably a ton of things. And I think this is where it's
Yeah,
interesting to get into like, well, what is the meaning of sorry and to apologize? Like, does it mean that you're taking ownership of something and that
exactly.
you're choosing to switch it around? Like you're going to make a, like repent of that action, or is it just like, I'm sorry? Because I'm thinking if my son were to come home crying and I go to him, I would say like, I'm so sorry that happened to you. Even though I didn't do it to him.
Yeah.
But it would be my way, and probably because it's the way on the top of my head, it would be my way of turning toward him and helping him feel heard and seen. And he probably wants someone to tell him he's sorry. Like probably the kid at school
Yeah.
didn't tell him he was sorry, and that's who should apologize and try to make it right. But so more, but I think we could look at it in a ton of different
Okay.
ways, and there probably are different ways to verbalize those
Right.
emotions.
Right. And I do again think it is about what one is feeling that conveys a
Mhm.
bigger message.
Yeah, for
But Brene
sure.
Brown is in my mind, right? Like where she
Mm,
often is distinguishing between sympathy, and sympathy is like, oh, I'm sorry that happened to you. And there's this place of like, I'm
yeah.
over here and you're over there. And I'm sorry this
Sucks to be
happened to
you.
you. Yeah,
Right.
exactly. Where the empathy is like, oh, that sounds really painful. That sounds really hard.
Mm,
Like, tell me about
yeah.
it. And, that I'm like in it with you. So again, language can help. And I do think
Mhm.
there's, some maybe inquiry around how am I using sorry? Like in the
Yeah.
past have used it habitually and it's,
Yeah.
people don't always
Yeah.
love on the receiving end. Like stop apologizing. Like you're okay. Like you don't need to
Right.
apologize.
Yeah, and that's very true too, because I have one of my coworkers, she says sorry for everything, and we're like, "You have to stop. You are not you no, you didn't do anything wrong, like this, So yeah, I think it's, probably a much deeper discussion than we
Right.
have time to flesh out in the rest of our time, but I love several of the points that you made in just and one thing that you've said over and over in different items we've talked about today is that the emotional connection and that emotional attunement is really the key. It's not even necessarily the exact words you use or anything like that. It's more of just the body language and the tone and all of the things that go into how can I show the other person I care about you, I'm listening, I'm here, how can we work together to move forward from this,
Yeah.
right?
And if I don't get it or it's too escalated, like how can I
Yeah.
slow down? How can I pause? How can I get curious?
Yeah.
And again, with modern living, all the demands, like it's really hard to
Mhm,
access that. So how do we give a
mhm.
little space to make more room for that? We are wired up for this. So when we
Yeah,
start to give some space for it, it can start to really breathe and bear
I
a
love
lot of
that.
fruit.
I love that. Well, Jessica, where can people find more about you, follow you, see the things you're doing, and maybe even listen to your podcast? What's your podcast about for people who might be interested?
Yeah, thank you. So the podcast is Empowered Relationship Podcast, and that is really focused on helping people negotiate long-lasting intimacy and feeling equipped and better set up for success.
Mm,
And the website that I have all the offerings is drjessicahiggins.com, and that's doctor with a DR. And I believe there's an opt in on the front page, and I imagine we give it to you for your show notes. And that's a free guide, which helps people workshop how to shift a critical statement into this more reveal or request, and some real
Mm,
examples and some language around how to do this. Again, most of us who operate in the critical tendency, it's habitual, and we even get a little bit of sometimes a dopamine hit because it can feel like
mm.
a little competitive, like a little bit of a win, like I got that, or, there's some clarity and calling things out sometimes and feeling like I nailed something, or the intellectual win. And so that can be just really difficult to get out of. And so just the practice of this and having some guidance. So that's the shifting criticism into connected communication.
I love that. We will include all of those links in the show notes so that people can go to you, find you, the link to your podcast as well. We may have include the link to when I was a guest on your show, which is
Yes.
over almost a year ago now. So we'll include that for people who want to listen as well. But Jessica, I have thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. I think we could talk for easily another 2 to 3 hours
Agreed.
about different things. So thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. I really enjoyed being here and having this conversation with you.
Here are my key takeaways from today's episode. And really, y'all, I loved so much of what we talked about. And I could go back through every single section and take away a key takeaway for you. But if we think of how this relates to our pies, our physical, intellectual, emotional, and spiritual attraction, which are the ways that other people are attracted to us by the work that we invest in each of these areas of our lives, then a clear takeaway from today's episode is the emotional attraction part of this, which is the one that is most important for long lasting relationships. The reason that this one is so important in what we talked about today is because when we talk about that emotional attunement, when we talk about how we can communicate with our partner or with our spouse or with our kids by saying, "Hey, here's where I'm feeling insecure right now. Here's what I need. How can we do this together?" When we bring the people into our lives into helping us with some of these decisions that we may be wanting to make in our lives, like maybe changing our self care schedule or whatever it might be, needing more help with the chores around the house, wanting to make a change in your career, a lot of times we anticipate a negative reaction from our spouse or from a friend or from a coworker. And because we anticipate that negative reaction, we go into the conversation primed to fight or primed to flee. So we may avoid the conversation because of the fear of rejection that we may have going into it or whatever it might be. When instead, perhaps it's just healthier to go in saying, "Here's how I'm feeling about this. I'm feeling really abandoned because you haven't been home in the past 4 nights for family dinner. And I put all this work into making the meal, and I just miss you. And I just miss us spending time together. And I would love for us to really find a way to connect and just spend more time together. And, hopefully find a way that where we can have family dinners together most nights of the week. How can we do that?" If we approach a situation in that way, as opposed to, "Why are you never home? I've been working so hard and so long trying to make this dinner, and it's so disrespectful of you to not even be here." Can you see the difference in those two approaches? Of course you can. Which one would you rather come home to? Of course, the first one. We can see how being vulnerable and talking about our needs and our emotions on the front end can be so helpful in really providing a strong emotional connection and a secure attachment into our relationships, but it's still hard to do because it's very vulnerable. So some things that we talked about today is really just even just thinking about your tone. It's more about your tone, less about the words that you use when your goal is, "I'm just trying to connect with you emotionally. I'm trying to let you hear my heart. I'm trying to connect with your heart." And that is such a key principle in having a healthy relationship. The other key part of what we talked about today, and one of the tips for criticism, is to turn a complaint or a criticism into a reveal or a request about you. So instead of focusing about the other person and what they did or didn't do, like not coming home for dinner, maybe instead turn it into the reveal about how you're feeling, like I had done in the example. "I'm feeling insecure. I'm feeling abandoned. You haven't been here." maybe I feel disrespected, or a reveal, but here is what I need. Here's what I'm needing from you. I want us to have some more time together where both of us are able to talk about our days and just connect on a deeper level. And that would mean a ton to me. And realize that your spouse has reveals and requests as well. They likely have complaints that underneath there is a reveal or request that they have, and theirs are as important as yours. So when we enter into the relationship wanting both of our needs to be met and help to meet each other's needs, this is the ideal situation for secure attachment and for a healthy relationship, for a healthy marriage. I hope that you loved today's episode as much as I did. If you found this helpful, share it with a friend who needs it. Maybe send it to your spouse so that you have a common language that you can use while entering into some topics and conversations that in the past have been more difficult. Maybe this will give you a better playbook to use to actually turn towards each other, as opposed to just continue having fight after fight after fight and not getting anything resolved, because that is not the goal of why we do this podcast. We want you to move forward in having healthier relationships and being more emotionally attractive and more attractive in all areas of our pies as we work on becoming our best selves. So share this with a friend. Would love if you would give the podcast a review wherever you listen to podcasts. And as always, until next week, stay strong.